Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We're very excited for this presentation. What's happening with NOAA Citizen Science, an analysis of our project portfolio by a VSFS intern. Before I jump into introducing our speakers, I have a few logistics for everyone. My name is Katie Rowley. I'm the outreach librarian for the NOAA Central Library, and I will be the technical host today. So if you are attending, you are muted, so you cannot speak, but you can put questions into the question panel, and I will be reading those questions off at the end of the presentation. If you have a question and you don't want to forget it, feel free to put it in the question panel. Just know that I'm going to hold that question until the end. If you have any technical issues, such as you can't hear the speakers or you can't see the slides that they are showing, please try logging off and back into the platform. That solves most issues with GoToWebinar. Also, please know that we are recording this, so if you do need to step away or if you would like to share this with a colleague later on, this will be recorded and posted up on the library's YouTube channel for you to share and watch there. Okay, as I said, this presentation is what's happening with NOAA Citizen Science. Our speakers today are Siobhan Powers, who is a virtual student federal service intern, and John McLaughlin, an education program manager for the Undersecretary's Office of Education. So Siobhan is an intern working with the Citizen Science for the NOAA Office of Education. She has taken her experiences of data collection and survey design from her undergraduate career and applied them to her internship here at NOAA. And John is the education program manager with the Office of Education within NOAA, and he serves as program officer for grant awards through NOAA's environmental literacy program and is a co-coordinator for citizen science efforts across the agency. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to John and Siobhan to start the presentation.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. As previously said, this is an analysis of NOAA Citizen Science. My name is Siobhan Powers, and my supervisor, John McLaughlin, will be presenting with me today. So starting off, I'm going to go over our agenda for today. We're going to be looking at the background, going into this internship, some stories of projects that we've collected, our collection and methodology for the project, and overall findings. So starting off with a little bit of background, first off, I have to say that all of my work is based on the intern who came before me. Her name was Casey Wilkerson, and she first made this survey in the summer of 2020 for FY19. It's based on her data that I was able to create this database and basically do everything that was needed throughout this internship. So who am I? My name is Siobhan Powers. As previously stated, I'm a virtual student federal service intern. I just graduated from High Point University with a bachelor's in political science, and I have a background in survey administration and data analysis through my university's Survey Research Center. So kind of going over the virtual student federal service program, I have either a QR code that you can scan with your phone or the website. If you would like to go over this, John will briefly explain the program, and I will go over some of what I've learned and what my experience was like.
Great, thanks, Siobhan. So virtual student federal service, the VSFS program, is offered by the State Department, but it's open to all federal agencies that want to host an intern virtually at about 20% time for a school year. And you apply and you offer positions in about the May timeframe, and students apply during the summer, and then you interview and select to start in the September timeframe. So we're currently in the student application phase for this coming year, but if you are interested in a position, offering a position, I would suggest considering it next spring. And I found it to be a very rewarding internship experience, both for our agency and for the students. So really looking for a mutually beneficial relationship. Have to say, Siobhan did some wonderful work here, as you'll see during this presentation, and really helped us move forward an important objective for our citizen science work. And hosting an intern through the VSFS program has a pretty high ease of use. They really try to make it a very flexible experience in terms of offering the position. You can interview in a way that suits your agency. It's not highly prescribed. So it's really a semi-structured environment. They do not offer salary for the students, but they allow you as an agency to do so. So we really found it's best practice with student internships to offer financial reimbursement to the students to really allow for equitable participation. So we were able to do that separately from the VFS program through mechanisms we had available to our office. But that VFS does allow that flexibility as well. So I wanted to make you aware of that. And with that said, I will turn things back over to Siobhan.
Yeah, so as John said, this is a mutually beneficial program. I would say that I've had a fantastic experience with both the program and my time at NOAA. I've gained skills that I would not have been exposed to otherwise. And I've said this to John, but I'm pretty much convinced that the reason I got into my grad school program is because of this internship and the opportunities that were presented to me through it. The program is great, and if you have the capabilities within your office to host it, I would 100% recommend it. It's been amazing. So moving on, we're going to be defining citizen science through the wording of the Citizen Science Act. It is a form of open collaboration in which individuals or organizations participate voluntarily in the scientific process, including enabling formulation of scientific research questions, creating and refining project design, conducting scientific experiments, collecting and analyzing data, interpreting the results of data, developing technologies and applications, making discoveries, and solving problems. So within, oh, and John is going to have a few notes on our use of terminology for citizen science.
Thanks, Siobhan. I want to recognize and acknowledge that this type of work that Siobhan just described goes by other names. We hear volunteer monitoring, community science, public participation, scientific research, among others. And there have been some concerns expressed about the term citizen. So NOAA is carefully considering what we term this work, but so far the community as a whole is still going with citizen science as the broadest term, but we within NOAA, as well within the field, recognize that it can be, and certainly in some cases is called other names. What's essential is really that definition more so than the terminology that's applied, the definition that Siobhan just overviewed. So with that note, I will turn things back over to Siobhan.
And just a note for later on in our presentation, we did include more inclusive terminology for projects to select if they wished in the data call we had. So moving on to CS, or citizen science, there are three main types. The first is contributory, in which volunteers are the primary data collectors. The second is collaborative, in which volunteers collect data and they refine the project design. And the third is co-created, in which the public was involved in most or all steps of the scientific process. So just to highlight our FY19 data, we can see that the majority of these projects were contributory, with collaborative being a close second. You're going to see that this is true for a lot of NOAA citizen science or community science projects, but we are seeing more and more collaborative and co-created projects. So looking at KZ's data from FY19, this is a breakdown of the line office distribution and what projects belong to which line offices. We can see that National Marine Fisheries had the largest, with National Weather Service and Office of Oceanic Atmospheric Research coming in as a close third, and NOS coming in as second. So John is going to cover over what is currently happening with NOAA citizen science.
Thanks, Siobhan. So one thing to note is that the idea of open collaboration in which volunteers participate in the scientific process is not new. It's not new within NOAA. Our agency manages projects that predate the establishment of our agency, such as the Cooperative Observer Program run by the National Weather Service, which dates back to 1891. What's changed is modern technologies allowing new ways for people to participate in these type of efforts and new ways to build community within those efforts. What apps allow people to do in terms of getting GPS coordinates, pictures, real-time data reporting, use of additional sensors within phones is kind of incredible, and has been a game changer for the field, as has the growth of online projects where people can help analyze imagery analyze data sets, audio files, videos from the comfort of their own home. As citizen science has grown rapidly in the past decade and a half, we started a community of practice at NOAA in 2013 to help spur communication and sharing among those working with citizen science or interested in doing so. This community has grown to over 225 participants, and if you're within NOAA or within a NOAA affiliated network such as Sea Grant or NEARS and are interested in becoming a member, please email me. I think Katie can email out or can chat out my email address, and we'll also have it on the slide at the end, but would love to sign you up as a member of our community. Because of the growth in citizen science and the impacts it has, we were named a science and technology focus area for NOAA in 2020, and we are excited to be one of 6 focus areas, working with the others on how we best collaborate to advance the work of our agency. And we released a NOAA citizen science strategy last year. And Katie, if you're able to, if you could chat out the link to that strategy, please. And over the past year, we've been working on drafting an action plan, which lays out the framework for how we're going to achieve the objectives in that strategy. And that action plan is currently undergoing review by our agency leadership, and we are excited to share it out when we're able to. Throughout all this work, tracking the impacts and the successes NOAA projects is having is key. And so we're really thankful for Siobhan's work in that area. And I'll turn things over to Siobhan, who now tells some of the success stories within these projects.
All right. So as John said, I'm going to cover a few stories of projects that were submitted into our database. The first one was Noodle Patrol, which is a project that is primarily located in Texas. A noodle is classified as a plastic pellet that serves as raw material in manufacturing plastics. Noodle Patrol has seen a huge growth, mainly through the Formosa lawsuit, which excuse me, which resulted in a $50 million total, where basically Noodle Patrol highlighted some of the plastic waste that was being produced by Formosa, and they're getting $200,000 per year as a payback through that. They've also just received a $400,000 grant through the National Marine Debris Program. They recently presented at the Texas Pollution Symposium, and they are primarily a contributory data collection, meaning that volunteers are primary data collectors. The second is Marine Debris Tracker. This is a collaborative project. It's worked with National Geographic and Morgan Stanley. It is a mobile app in which participants will patrol a certain area for 20 to 30 minutes and find any trash or litter items that can make its way into waterways. It is active in about 90 countries, and it is currently expanding into the Mississippi Delta and focusing on more equitable representation for underrepresented areas. The third is Urban Heat Island, which is a contributory data service. Looking at this photo in the top left, we can see that this is typically what they do to highlight and collect their data. This is it focuses in cities, which are typically hotter than urban areas, and volunteers will either attach this camera to their car or to a bicycle and just ride around the city. And basically they're looking for heat indexes. So this photo right here of the tree was taken in the Raleigh-Durham area, which is where I am located, and it's highlighting the heat index within that certain area, and it's funded through a NOAA grant. And according to Dr. Rich Spinrad, our nation faces a climate crisis that has exacerbated inequalities for low-income communities and communities of color. NOAA is helping communities measure their hottest places so that they can use information to inform strategies to reduce the unhealthy and deadly effects of extreme heat. So the Urban Heat project has been a huge contributor to this effort that NOAA is currently undergoing. We can see that in this image right here, we can see the warmest days of the year spread out by months. So you can see over here in the Northwest or West Coast that the hottest days are in October, whereas we're seeing it much hotter earlier in the year on the East Coast. And the fourth project is Skywarn Weather. This is a contributory project. Volunteers will track storms, identify rising weather issues or data that can only be visible from the ground, and the data is called in and reported to the National Weather Service. And this is kind of just a fun story as to my experience with National Weather Service. I actually worked with them to be my sort of guinea pigs for the project. They were my testers for the database. And a couple weeks ago, I was watching The G Word, starring Adam Conover, who was a comedian that made his way from YouTube all the way to Netflix and worked with the Obamas to create this series. In the second episode, Weather, there's a lot of talk about NOAA projects, which I thought was interesting, but they specifically named the Skywarn program at minute 23, and they walked through the entire process. They got in the car with a Skywarn volunteer, and they drove around rural Pennsylvania, highlighting what these volunteers do for the project, which I thought was so cool. And I immediately contacted John, and I was like, oh my gosh, like, you won't believe this. It was really cool to see that in the real world. Next, I'm going to be covering our collection methodology. First off, this is the program that KZ implemented in the summer of 2020. She used a Google form, which was great. It was able to kind of put this in a centralized database, but moving on, we wanted to move into the NAC database. So now I'll cover that in a little bit. So in creating my or our project, we looked at three main sources on how we could frame the questions and frame the survey. The first was using the White House OSCP report. We used Sea Grant questions, and thirdly, we used KZ's questions. We also focused on adding new questions such as underrepresented groups, specific barriers hindering growth, additional measures and outcomes, intended grade levels, and inclusive terminology to describe the project. These were all mainly taken from the OSTP report. And moving on, we transferred the data collected in Google to the NAC database. This allows us to have a centralized database where we can easily have graphs reporting the data, where all the information can be located and identified. Projects don't have to enter in new information every year continuously, and it just makes it so much easier for the people who actually work within the program. So this will kind of walk you through how we do it, and I will actually give a live presentation on how easy it is. So we can see here that it's fairly easy. A lot of this is just drop down menu, and you just write in any information. And then when you're entering your outputs, all you have to do is click on the individual cells and provide the numbers. And I will show that for you right now. All right. So moving on to this, if you want to add a new project, you go right here to this little menu right where it says projects, add projects and reports and data. You will click add project and get right to it. So I will just name this NOAA Citizen Science and put myself as a primary contact. I will mark how volunteers participate in the project and any inclusive terminology I would like to include. I will call it public science. And here I can also highlight the main goals of my project. So I will say that this is for research as well as education and outreach. Here you can select the primary line office. I will go here and say Office of Education. And we can also focus on other questions as well, such as underrepresented groups in STEM or following organizations we work with. And here we can also include some questions that if you want to provide longer answers, it's available. So here in this text box, we can provide URLs. As well as provide options for project leads to say what relevant outcomes or measures they track within their projects, and any specific barriers hindering growth, which we found this question to be very important with the recent pandemic, saying that it did halt a lot of growth within these projects. And it is easy as that. And just like that, you've added a project to this database. And if you want to go from here, you can simply just scroll down and find your project. Here we see it. And from here, you can add these manually. So I will say we had one observation in 2020. Just like that, we can add all of our data. This was much easier compared to the Google form, seeing as this does provide existing database, so you don't have to manually enter every bit of information every single time you do it. And now I will move on to our findings that we had in our recent collection. So the first is that our primary line offices, we can see that sanctuaries and fisheries did have the largest amount, with NOS following closely after. We can see that monitoring and outreach were the main goals of these projects, with research and education following closely behind. We can also see that these projects, with the option of inclusive terminology, did choose to continue with the citizen science moniker, but many others found that these more inclusive options best describe their projects. And we can see that while a lot of these projects did not have a specific group in mind, Black and African American populations and women and girls were the largest underrepresented groups that were sought out. As for partnering organizations, we can see that state and local governments, as well as universities and college, just academia in general, have been the largest partners for these projects. And as for how volunteers contribute, we can see that contributory still remains the largest, but collaborative projects have grown as compared to FY19. When looking at this comparison for FY19 data, we can see that one, there's a lot more projects in general, but the margins in which collaborative and co-created projects have grown is significant compared to the original collection. And here we can actually see a breakdown of the data. So we can see that in FY19, there was 65 million observations, and in 20 and 21, there was over 100 million. That was something neither John nor I anticipated, and that was extremely interesting number to come across, as well as volunteers that participated in volunteer hours, seeing how even though those might have shrunk or lessened with the 2020 pandemic, the volunteers and observations still grew. As for key findings of the data, we first saw that the challenge of collecting data across different project models, this meaning that not all projects report the same. A lot of projects simply record the number of observations, but they don't track volunteers or they don't track volunteer hours. So this meaning, as you can see, there was a huge disparity for the numbers of observations, volunteer hours, simply because a lot of projects don't measure that. And that was definitely hard, trying to see whether or not projects were growing if they didn't track volunteers, or if certain projects only used like one boat, but they collected like 20 million data points in a year. The second finding was the impact of COVID-19 and the evolution of how projects are administered. We saw in this project that a large number of these programs have switched over to a data model or using an app. A lot of the times they don't track users. We can see that with projects like MPing, where they only track number of observations, but for privacy reasons, they don't track users. And as for switching to the database, it was very helpful, but there was certainly some growing pains. A lot of people initially were hesitant to start with this new database just because it was unfamiliar, and I definitely had to motivate some people to switch over and walk them through it. But eventually we found that a lot of people did prefer this method. And John will cover the next steps.
Thanks, Siobhan. So I really want to put this work Siobhan has just overviewed in perspective of where it stands within our larger efforts to promote and support citizen science within our agency. So I mentioned our citizen science strategy, which we released last year. And the strategy has an objective. For those of you who track these objectives closely, it's under goal 1, it's objective C. And it's to develop flexible and diverse metrics and processes to track projects and impacts. And this is not a trivial exercise to create these metrics. Within this field of citizen science, it's been a lot of work to develop metrics, but it's quite challenging, in large part for one of the challenges, because of one of the challenges that Siobhan just overviewed, and that is the challenge of the multiple types of project models that are at play. So citizen science projects all have a commonality that they engage volunteers in the scientific process, but in which portion of the scientific process they engage those volunteers can vary. And as you saw and heard, how those volunteers are engaged can vary greatly, from an exercise that takes less than 10 seconds to an exercise that's done once every few years and takes hours, days, or even weeks. There are projects that have known volunteers, and there are projects that have unknown and anonymous volunteers, and sometimes even unknown numbers of volunteers. So developing metrics is a serious challenge. And so we currently have our draft for our NOAA Citizen Science Action Plan, which I mentioned earlier, which is going through final approval. But this action plan breaks down sets of actions that we can take to accomplish the objectives within the strategy. And under the objective to create metrics, one of the first steps we have is to develop it in our current draft of the action plan is to develop an inventory of existing projects. And that's exactly what Siobhan's project here has been helping us do, and Casey's earlier work help us to do in a major way. And we fully intend to continue to create and to collect this data and to use the database that Siobhan has developed to really look at the growth and the evolution of projects, and as a first step to help inform the creation of the metrics. And as Siobhan did in calling out stories, we're looking for successful and innovative project models as well, and that will help us figure out how we can best support those innovative and successful project models and expand those within our agency. So with that perspective provided, I will turn things back over to Siobhan.
All right. And now I will be moving on to special thanks. Obviously, special thanks to John. He's been my mentor. He has walked me through this entire process. He has just been absolutely fantastic. In those early months, he sat me down and just walked me through exactly what citizen science meant and kind of gave me a deep dive into this world that's previously unknown to me and sparked like a lifelong interest. So huge thanks to him. I can't thank him enough. Dr. John Beck, he was so just amazing. He took the time out of his day to teach me how to use the NAC database when he could have easily done it himself. It took several days and several hours, but he helped me master at least that part of the program. Huge thank you to Laura Ormland. She has been absolutely fantastic throughout this entire process. She has been there for me when John is unavailable. She's given me feedback and just been amazing with her thoughts and her guidance throughout this project. Huge shout out to Chris Meyer and Galen Scott. They were the people who agreed to test out this project for me and gave me great information and feedback on how I can improve it. And a huge thank you to the NOAA Office of Education. I am so happy and proud to have been a part of this team. I'm so glad I got to meet all of you. That is it.
And before we go to questions, Siobhan, I just want to offer a few thanks as well. And the first is to you and to KZ, who went before you. We've been really fortunate to have two amazing students who have really helped advance this work and given us a better sense for NOAA citizen science efforts and the impacts they're having. And you've been so thoughtful about this work and analyzing this data and collecting this data. And I also want to thank all the people who reported the data through the database. I should say we have, there's no requirement for people to report. We have no stick for those who choose not to report, and we really don't even have that much of a carrot other than helping advance the community and helping us get a better sense for the efforts that are ongoing and the impacts they're having and ways to help through sharing. So that really is the carrot for people to go through the process of importing their project into this database and for sharing information about their project. So I really want to acknowledge all those project managers who went through that process and are willing to share and are willing to be part of our community practice. Really thankful for you. We would not be here without all these contributions from a collaborative group. So with that said, Siobhan, I'll turn it back over to you.
And this would be the time if you guys have any questions, comments, to just put that in the chat, and we will answer them as best we can.
Yes, thank you so much, Siobhan and John. This was an amazing seminar, and we do have some questions. So the first question is, starts with a compliment. Hi, great work. Thanks for the presentation. Did you happen to collect metrics on the size and geographic scope of these citizen science projects? There's some interesting literature on how smaller, more localized projects have greater ability to engage and encourage citizen participation and impact.
So that's a great question. That actually was covered in the first interpretation of this survey with KZ. And unfortunately, John and we had so many questions we wanted to ask, but we were concerned that if it was too long, people would, I don't want to say lose interest, but be overwhelmed with the amount of information we were asking. So that was a question we unfortunately had to cut from the final survey.
Great, thanks. Next question. What surprised you most about the data you collected?
I think the projects where I got like 20 million observations, that kind of blew me away with how a lot of these projects were collecting their data and just the sheer volume that they had. That definitely caught me off guard.
This is John. If you don't mind, I'll take a. There's been so much about surprised me, but one thing that really stood out that I want to mention is how many of our projects reported that they use collaborative or co-creative models. And Siobhan overviewed the model types. The first is contributory, where you have kind of the science side of the enterprise design the questions, and then volunteers just participate. And then you have the co-created, where volunteers have more input into creating the project, and then collaborative, where it's really a fully collaborative, or sorry, it's collaborative where they have input into the project, and co-created where it's really a fully co-created project. And the volunteer communities help create or even lead the creation of the project. And these collaborative and co-created projects can often engage communities that contributory projects can't. And often communities that are traditionally underrepresented within STEM sciences. And so we're pushing for more co-created and collaborative projects within our agency. But a lot of the traditional projects were contributory, and I actually thought that even a higher percentage than this were contributory. So it's nice to see so many collaborative and co-creative projects taking place within our agency. So that was some insight for me from this data.
Great, thank you, John and Siobhan, for answering that one. Here's another question. Siobhan and John, kind of flip sides for this. How did you learn of the virtual student federal service from both of your perspectives?
John, would you like to go first?
So I actually was fortunate to have done a detail a few years ago to the General Services Administration to help manage the citizenscience.gov platform. And within GSA, they were using VSFS as a way to bring in students virtually to help out with a lot of the technology needs that GSA manages across the federal government. So I heard about it from a colleague at GSA, and we recruited and hosted a VSF intern who helped us really move forward citizenscience.gov and the filtering capabilities of their catalog of projects. And had such a positive experience there that when I came back to NOAA, I was interested in potentially hosting a VSF intern here. So it's definitely a promotion as well for details where you can go to other agencies and learn more about what they do and bring it back to your home agency. And I do know there's I've since learned about quite a few VSF internships within our agency.
As for me, I can best describe it as scouring the USA Jobs website. I had all the notifications turned on for upcoming jobs that were available, and one day in July of last year, I got an email for the Virtual Student Federal Service Program that had thousands of vacancies, and I happened upon this program and thought, oh my gosh, this is great. I have such a good background for it, and I'm very interested in NOAA as well as communities. And the program itself is very large and very extensive, and just the sheer amount of what they had available was absolutely, I found it to be amazing. But in short, just constantly searching the USA Jobs website, looking for positions within the federal government that I could do while I was still attending undergrad.
Thanks, Siobhan. And we do have a kind of follow-up question. If you feel like sharing, what is next for you after your internship wraps up?
Yeah, so right now I'm looking at jobs in the DMV area. I'm going to be attending American University next year, getting my master's in U.S. foreign policy and national security. I'm really interested in international relations, and I'm hoping to focus on a career on climate security and just kind of moving forward with that.
Great, thanks, Siobhan. Okay, if there are more questions, now is the time to type them in. But is there something we didn't ask about this project that you do want to share, or that you didn't put into the presentation but feel like would be good to share with the NOAA community here?
I can't think of anything. Can you, John?
Great question, Katie. Just a note that these types of projects can have so many different impacts. And some of what we'll focus on this database is the impacts and benefits that they're having to NOAA or to the scientific enterprise for which they work in. But we have not done looked at the complementary impacts they're actually having on the volunteers and the volunteer communities. So this was all information collected from the project managers on the NOAA side. This was not information collected from the volunteers themselves. So the whole other side of the coin to tell about the impacts these projects are having in terms of the impacts they're having on those people who participate in them.
Is that a project for the next VSFS intern?
It is a major project, and I could think of nothing better than having an outstanding VSF intern such as Siobhan, if we were fortunate enough to get one again, to look at that in a future time.
Great. Okay. Well, I don't see any more questions, but I do have one final wrap up, and we can end a little early. No worries there. But Siobhan, what advice or feedback would you give John/NOAA and a new intern?
Oh man, I mean, I think John just executed himself so well throughout this internship. He has been amazing in every aspect. So no concerns there. For the next intern, I was talking with John about maybe creating a singular document where they can have sort of everything they need instead of hopping around. That was something we did create for ourselves throughout the internship. But mostly, I would just say be available to learn and be open as to what you can discover, because I definitely came in with a sort of, oh, I know what I'm doing attitude, and I was quickly humbled. Just being open to new experiences and learning what NOAA has to offer, and being open to meet everyone you can. I told John throughout the internship that I will do whatever and learn and meet whoever, because I'm just looking for anything I can glean from this internship. So I would definitely say that for the next intern.
Thank you, Siobhan. John, kind of flip side, what would you tell your NOAA colleagues about getting or facilitating and working with an intern?
Yeah, I think much like within the projects that were presented in this database, looking for those mutually beneficial experiences. So when designing a project, keep in mind a project that the work you do within your agency will benefit, but also a project that has opportunity for the student to bring their creativity, which these interns will bring, and that's a huge benefit, and their own flavor too as well. So allowing that flexibility, and then I'll say not so much advice, but one thing I do struggle with as a mentor in this regard, but I think it's critical, is when to go in depth in explaining some of the situations and the rules and the standard operating procedures that underlie what we do and how we do it, and when not to. So I know, Siobhan, at times I went into a lot of depth explaining why we did something the way we did it, in hopes that was kind of providing you useful benefit to understand how we do business here at NOAA, and why we were running the project, why we're running it, but also that can be pretty dry and boring at times. So finding that right balance of when to go in depth on explaining things and kind of choosing which things to go in depth on is something I think was a challenge for me, but something I did try to think through when interacting with Siobhan and with other interns. So just a note to mentors to at least be cognizant of that.
Great, thank you so much, Siobhan and John. I don't see any more questions at the moment, so I think we have answered what the people wanted to know, and you've answered my questions for sure. So I want to thank you both for this presentation today, and I want to thank our attendees for sticking around and asking such great questions and paying attention in such great detail. With that, I'll just remind everybody we recorded this, so if you did want to return to this presentation, it'll be up on the library's YouTube channel. And with that, I hope everyone has a wonderful, safe rest of their Tuesday. Thank you again, Siobhan and John, for your presentation and your words today.
Thank you so much, Katie.
Thank you.